Okay, so I'm briefly going to overview some material from a recent book, which I think is published in Chinese too, I believe. It's called Artificial You, AI and the Future of Your Mind. And I'm a philosophy professor, so I'm worried about the underlying philosophical issues, but I'm also an AI expert, so I kind of blend in issues in AI, cognitive science, philosophy. So the talk is called AI-based brain enhancements, superintelligence, and the future of the mind. Okay, so let's get started. Well, I'm going to start with what philosophers call thought experiments. So thought experiments are imaginary stories that are designed to get us to think about the underlying nature of the issues from a philosophical standpoint. So at the beginning of the book, I have a paragraph that involves a thought experiment. So I'm just going to read it to you. Okay, so this is at the very beginning of the book. It's 2045. Today, you're out shopping, and your first stop is the Center for Mind Design. As you walk in, a large menu stands before you. It lists brain enhancements with funky names. Hive Mind is a brain chip allowing you to experience the innermost thoughts of your family members. Zen Garden is a microchip for Zen master level meditative states. Human Calculate gives you savant level mathematical skills. What would you select, if anything? Enhanced attention, Mozart level musical skills. You can order a single enhancement or a bundle of several. So that's the thought experiment. And in this talk, I want to discuss what we could do as a sensible reaction to the thought experiment. So the talk concerns the future of the mind itself. It's about how our understanding of ourselves, our minds, and our natures can change the future for better or for worse. So today, let's ask, at a place like the Center for Mind Design, could you really merge with artificial intelligence by adding microchips to your brain? What does that even mean? Well, here's a roadmap for where we are going. So first, I'm going to offer some background issues involving transhumanism, neurotechnology, and age-old philosophical questions about our nature. In part two, I'm going to suggest that there may be some design ceilings on human intelligence amplification, involving philosophical issues, actually, like consciousness and personhood. In part three, I'll close by making some big picture statements about our place in the cosmos and the road ahead based on my project with NASA as the NASA chair with NASA. So let's talk background. So as you know, the brain's evolution was heavily constrained by environmental, anatomical, and metabolic demands. For example, our skulls are small. Our brains can't get past that point, and we have metabolic demands on our brains constantly, and all kinds of things. We need to sleep, for example. We're hunter-gatherers, so there were evolutionary constraints on our evolution based on the fact that we were hunter-gatherers. Well, AI-based brain enhancement technology, in contrast, could augment intelligence at a rate that's much quicker than our own biological evolution, at least in principle. I'm not saying that could happen now, but I'm saying in principle, that's a real possibility. That would involve something that I call mind design. That's a kind of intelligent design, if you will. Okay? But we, not some god, are the designers. So maybe it's unintelligent design if we mess up. Well, I find the prospect of mind design rather humbling because I don't think we're terribly evolved. I mean, we walked the moon, we harnessed the energy of the atom, yet all around us, racism, war, greed. I mean, the list is long. our social development often seems to lag behind our technological capacities. So I think it's worthwhile to start thinking about brain enhancement now, because the smarter we are about the social development, the better things will go. Okay, so let's go back to this idea of a Center for Mind Design then. So back to the thought experiment at the beginning of the book. Well, suppose if clinical trials go as planned, customers will soon be able to purchase an enhancement bundle that they call Merge. That's a series of enhancements allowing you to gradually augment and then transfer all of your mental functions to the cloud, to the internet, over a period of 5 years. So let me ask you this. Would you do it? Would you merge with artificial intelligence in that very radical way? Well, believe it or not, there are philosophers, sociologists, psychologists, technologists who all suggest that eventually we should merge with AI in this way. Individuals who uphold this platform are called transhumanists, and you can learn more about them at the website of the organization Humanity Plus. What transhumanists say is that humans can overcome their biological limitations through science and technology, and that they can live in principle even until the end of the universe through the use of nanotechnology, AI technology, and more. They believe that it's an individual's right to choose. They believe that the technology, of course, must be treated with great care. There should be regulations on its use that make it safe and not able to be abused by an authoritarian country or a third party like Google. They want the safe development of these technologies for all people. And of course, they want people to have the right to say no. So if somebody doesn't want a brain chip, if they don't want to go to the Center for Mind Design, there should be legal protections. Okay, so that's what the transhumanists think. And increasingly, they've become very influential. So individuals like Elon Musk, Nick Bostrom, who wrote that influential bestseller on superintelligence several years ago, and who heads the Oxford Future of Humanity Institute, is a transhumanist. He founded the movement, in fact. Ray Kurzweil, for years, has been writing really interesting books on transhumanism. Stephen Hawking, the late physicist Stephen Hawking, was a transhumanist, talking a lot about brain uploading and whatnot. The list is quite long. Well, let me say a little bit more about what the transhumanists believe, because it's exciting to me, this idea that humans could overcome their biological limitations. And that's pretty general. But the transhumanists actually mean something very specific. They propose a sort of trajectory for human intelligence augmentation that is the following. So they say you start with the unenhanced human, and the human goes to something like a Center for Mind Design or whatever, and they significantly upgrade their cognitive, perceptual, and even other physical enhancements. And eventually, over time, as the technology develops and becomes safe, they become post-human. That is, at a certain point, they're no longer technically human. Further, as the technology progresses over time, they become super intelligent. A super intelligence is a being that is smarter than a human in every respect possible: scientific reasoning, social skills, and more. Through these intelligence augmentations, through especially brain chips and merging with AI, the transhumanists believe that an unenhanced human over time becomes post-human and then eventually becomes a form of super intelligent AI herself. Okay, so that's the idea. So you may have heard about brain uploading, for example. There are some really interesting Hollywood movies depicting this sort of future. So consider Transcendence, starring Johnny Depp, in which he tries to defy death by uploading. The character reminds me a lot in the views that he has of a transhumanist like Ray Kurzweil. Of course, a lot goes wrong in the movie, and I'm not suggesting the future will be exactly like that. There's also a fun series right now available. I can't remember if it's on Netflix or where, but it's called Upload, which depicts that scenario. And then there are classic films as well. Vanilla Sky, for example, is an interesting classic movie depicting that scenario, although the individual is actually in virtual reality and they're living their life in virtual reality. Okay, so anyway, one thing I want to emphasize is that I only have, a few minutes. I have like 30 minutes or something. So I'm going to focus on one issue with transhumanism today. And I want to emphasize that there's, a very large group of transhumanists out there.
Susan, sorry to interrupt. You have about 50 minutes or 45 minutes. The whole time is 1 hour, so you could have 45 minutes or 50 minutes.
Okay.
It depends on you, and you can leave some time.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah,
sure. Thank
half an hour.
Oh yeah, I just didn't want to hog up too much, but thank you. Okay, well, I was just going to point out to the audience that there's one thing I'm going to focus on for the rest of the talk, because the idea bothers me so deeply. The transhumanists, they tend to say that enhancements that are going to get us to post-human intelligence and superintelligence are going to involve actually replacing parts of the biological brain itself with microchips, or going beyond the biological brain by uploading our consciousness and our thinking onto the cloud. So it's this kind of idea of neural replacement that I'm quite worried about as a philosopher, and I'll explain why soon. So I'm going to focus on the idea of the replacement of parts of the brain with microchips today. But there are lots of other ways you might enhance your intelligence. So you might try genetic enhancements, for example. You might try nanotechnology to improve your biological brain. There's so much out there, but I want to focus on this because this, I think, has been very influential. And just to give you a context for that, I think that you might think this is a speculative issue, but transhumanism has become an increasingly influential view of the future of the mind. Especially in North America and Europe. And I can't comment, I haven't had the pleasure of going to China yet. But I like talking about the issues because there's a classic problem here that's very philosophical. And it is the question, the deep question, does consciousness transcend the biological brain? And of course, religions have been asking this for years. And now we're doing it in a technological way. I'm asking whether you could upload to the cloud and actually survive the death of your biological brain. Furthermore, these topics connect up with cognitive science, which has a kind of overarching view that suggests that the mind is something like a computer program. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the actual science that's under development today regarding brain chips. So Elon Musk has recently commented that humans can keep up with AI by having some sort of merger of biological intelligence and machine intelligence. And a few years ago, he founded a company called Neuralink, which has the aim of creating an implantable brain chip, allowing data from your brain to travel wirelessly to your digital devices to connect you to the internet and amplify your intelligence, enhance the speed of mental processing and reaction to digital data coming in, and connect you to your loved ones. the project, if you go to YouTube, you can see where the project's at. As of, I think it's about 6 months ago, they were testing the device in monkeys. Before that, they had implanted it in pigs. The interesting thing about their technology is the wireless nature of the technology, so that, it does pose the opportunity for it to be extremely useful. These technologies are often used to help individuals with terrible brain impairments, which I think is great, as opposed to a future use in which these technologies would augment regular unenhanced human intelligence. So right now, another project that exists is the artificial hippocampus, designed by Ted Berger at the University of Southern California. The hippocampus is part of the brain that lays down new memories. So this is already in clinical trials in humans in the United States. It's a long-lasting project. It's been going on for about a dozen years. It's had some successes. It's very exciting because it allows individuals to lay down new memories who don't have a working hippocampus. Facebook, Colonel, the Defense Department in the United States, I mean, everyone is working on, this is kind of the next wave of AI. Google, the idea here is that if we get wireless devices, whether it be a wearable technology, such as a wristband or a shirt or an implantable chip, individuals can seamlessly connect with digital technology. Okay, wow, right? Well, I want to bring up some ethical considerations. So there's a field called neuroethics, which I work in, and I talk about it in a previous book. And I think we need to really think about the ethics of all of this. So for example, you might say, wow, if I'm going to die anyway, it would be great to be able to live forever by uploading my consciousness and my brain to the cloud, for example. Or you might say, even now, I would love a brain chip to be free from what we might call unwanted psychology. I mean, think of all the times when we might want to do something, but we can't carry it out. Or think about individuals who are depressed and who suffer deeply from mental illness. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have these kinds of technologies so that we have more choice in the way that our brains run? Then maybe I wouldn't be so addicted to caffeine. So, but the thing that really worries me, and I've written some things about this, is the dystopian nature of all this. And I work in Washington, D.C. with U.S. Congress, and, I warn them about this. I mean, the thing that really freaks me out is the possibility that the closer and closer you get to the biological brain with your digital technologies, the more the data could be sold in a capitalist economy to the highest bidder, so that, Google now knows about your innermost thoughts, or an overstepping government could have access to everybody's thoughts. And I find that terrifying. I mean, nobody wants a world in which, there's mind control. Nobody wants their innermost thoughts sold to the highest bidder or accessible to government agencies, right? I mean, in the US, we have the NSA, for example. So this all sounds really awful to me. And I worry that it might create what I call a thought data economy. So right now we have, a sort of data economy with the social media companies. And I mean, pretty much can't turn on your computer without being a part of it. And in the future, it could be a thought data economy, which is, from a regulatory standpoint, there's just no guidelines on this. There are no laws that clearly protect your thoughts in these contexts that I know of. And so, I've been talking to the US Congress about these issues. Okay, well, now let's get to the philosophy side of things that goes beyond just the ethical observations. Now I want to talk about what I call design ceilings. And these issues actually involve a field called philosophy of mind. So design ceilings are limits on human intelligence amplification that aren't imposed by evolution or even technology. They're actually philosophical limits. Now, of course, technology will have medical limits to what you can do to the brain. There'll be limits on microchip evolution and so on. But here I'm talking about something else. I will talk about two kinds of limits right now. First, I'll talk about what I call a consciousness ceiling that arises if microchips don't underlie conscious experience. Then I'll talk about what I call a self ceiling. That's a point beyond which the person who attempts to enhance is no longer the same individual they were before. So the procedure actually causes that individual to cease to exist. So let's talk first about consciousness. So I know one of the speakers at your conference is David Chalmers. I don't know if he already spoke. But, he's a specialist on this too. Even way more than I am. I mean, he made, problems of consciousness famous. As he points out, when you see the rich hues of a sunset or you smell the aroma of your morning coffee, it feels like something to be you. Consciousness is that inner quality to your experience, the felt quality of your mental life. So whenever you're awake, even when you're dreaming, there's a felt quality to your inner life. And in the normal cases, nobody else has access to that. It's private, and that's what it is to be you. Well, Richard Dawkins made this comment in a movie that we were both in called Super Sapiens. He said, "It's not obvious to me that a replacement of our species by our own technological creations would be a bad thing." But in response, I worry that if the microchips that underlie conscious experience do not give rise to consciousness, if they're not the right stuff, then it would be a really bad thing, because we would be replacing our own conscious experience with brains that are artificial and don't have the felt quality of experience. So that would be terrible. That would be, I think, quite a disaster. So here's what I call the consciousness ceiling. What if you go to the Center for Mind Design and you buy that enhancement called Merge? Well, if AI isn't conscious, if it's the wrong stuff to underlie conscious experience, merging is a very bad idea. Because if microchips are the wrong stuff for consciousness, there's no mind-machine merger that's going to work. If you tried to merge with AI using microchips that replace parts of your biological brain, you would lose your conscious experience. And your mind eventually would no longer even exist. That would be an enhancement wall. That would be what I call a design ceiling on intelligence amplification. So that's not great. So if you are a transhumanist, you might want to consider the science of replacing the parts of the brain with microchips for the areas of the brain that underlie conscious experience. Okay? I've written some pieces on this for the New York Times and Financial Times that are very short little op-eds, just to kind of hope to get the idea out. And it's so funny because it's a philosophical issue, right? So it's not something that is going to occur necessarily to scientists. This really is an interdisciplinary point. It's not a point that is well understood outside of philosophical circles. Well, now I want to talk about a different ceiling. I want to talk about what I call the self ceiling. So let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that the consciousness ceiling doesn't arise, that when you replace parts of your brain with microchips, you don't lose conscious experience. Well, would you buy merge then? Would it be okay if you walked into a Center for Mind Design on the assumption that your rights are protected and that the technology is safe? Well, in order to understand whether you should enhance, you need to understand what you are to begin with. And there we get into longstanding philosophical issues about what it is to be a self or a person. What are we? Would you continue to exist, or would you have been replaced by someone or something else, is the question. And that gets into issues in my home discipline. Like before I started working on AI, I did metaphysics, which is a field that studies the fundamental nature of reality. And in that field, there was a literature on the metaphysics of everyday objects that basically suggests that things in general have properties that are essential to their nature. So for example, take a coffee machine. Say you're making an espresso shot and somebody takes out a gun and they explode the machine and it becomes ruined. And, you know, suppose it's just in pieces, and you might say that the machine no longer exists. Some properties, some features of things are such that they're essential to the continuation of the object. Others aren't. For example, the color of the espresso machine, if you change that, it doesn't mean that the machine ceases to exist. Well, the question here is what is essential to our nature? For example, do we have souls? Is our brain essential to our nature? What are we exactly? And my point here is that even if enhancement brings superintelligence, it must not involve the elimination of any of your essential properties. And I make a case for this in Artificial You, the book I was telling you about. So what if, for example, you go to the Center for Mind Design and you buy the enhancement merge and you change too much of yourself so that you lose something essential to you? In that case, you didn't merge with artificial intelligence. In fact, you actually killed yourself accidentally. That would be a rather terrible situation in which our technology was meant to make our lives better, but because we fail to understand the underlying philosophical issues, we actually cease to exist. So this is what I call a self-sealing. It's a point beyond which the person who attempts to enhance is no longer the same individual they were before, because the procedure actually causes them to no longer exist. So a new person may be created, but it wouldn't be them. And I might give you a story just to help you understand this. Think about an individual who has a radical brain injury now, like in today's world. So I have a friend, sadly, who had this happen to her. She fell down a hill and had a very, very serious brain injury. And when she woke up and when she recovered, she had lost all of the memories of her past. And she was a savant. So she was a genius and had new skills that she'd never had before and an entirely different personality. She became obsessed with art and mathematics, had previously not even been a student she didn't enjoy school. And now she's a famous artist. She was not an artist before. And she actually says to me that she died that day that she had the accident and that a new person was born. And that's what I'm getting at. Okay, well, in the field of philosophy, there are different theories about what the person is. So for example, one is that idea that you are basically a material being and that your brain and nervous system are essential to who you are. And if that's the case, then obviously, if you replace parts of your brain with microchips, at some point you will cease to exist because your brain would cease to exist. There's also something called the psychological continuity theory that goes back to the philosopher Locke and others. It's probably the most popular view right now in the philosophical literature in North America. And that view says that what we are depends on having a sort of a psychology that continues over time. And, you know, in this case, like if you augmented your brain and changed yourself very quickly, you actually would cease to exist because your continuity would break. Well, anyway, I don't have time to go through all of these different views, but the transhumanists, they have a sort of version of the continuity view, which they call patternism. And it says that what's essential to you is your computational configuration overall. And I think that view faces the same kind of problem that the psychological continuity view faced, which is which changes to the brain are actually compatible with your psychological continuity. We just don't know. So these are philosophical issues. But what I want to suggest is that each of these views of personal identity has its own implications about whether to merge. So if it's brain-based materialism, if something like that's true, then as I say in red here, neurotechnology should actually develop biological enhancements and minimal AI enhancements that don't replace or damage the brain. If you have a soul theory and you go into the Center for Mind Design, you should probably ask your religious advisor whether you should do it. Depends on the religious views, I suppose. So anyway, what I suggest overall, just to kind of end soon, is that we need to be very humble about the future and our understanding about what we should and should not do with respect to the brain, and that we need to educate the public and the scientists about the issues. So claims about survival by transhumanists that involve transferring one's mind to a new kind of substrate, such as the cloud, for example, you know, silicon chips, computers, carbon nanotube chips, whatever. These should be carefully scrutinized, these claims, because these involve making very drastic alterations to the brain. Bear in mind that there is intense disagreement over these issues in the philosophical literature. So it's not like you can decide whether there are design ceilings based on doing science alone. So that I call this the stance of metaphysical humility. And I suggest a safer approach would be to seek a limited integration with AI through external removable devices or implants that don't remove existing brain tissue. Now that said, I don't believe that people should enhance. I think it should be optional. And I think it has to be safe from the abuse of governments, capitalist systems. It has to be medically safe and so on. So my job then is to inform the public of risks. Now, the big picture to close up. So I had the pleasure of being the NASA chair about a year ago with NASA. And it was based on a long project I had with them for 2 years on the future of intelligent systems. And I think what I've said today actually can be put into perspective concerning the larger picture about the evolution of intelligence in the universe. So one thing to think about is if there's life out on other planets, you know, a lot of the astrobiologists will say that there is. They'll say that they're exoplanets and that they're populated. That's kind of a view right now, which is not uncontroversial, but is kind of a leading view about life on other planets, that it exists and that there's lots of it. If life survives its technological maturity, it might be the case that these intelligent systems actually become artificial. They turn on their own computers, they develop enhancements to their biological brains. and they become super intelligent beings that are themselves artificial intelligences. So this means that the issue of design ceilings isn't just an issue we're facing on Earth. It's an issue that the evolution of intelligent systems face more generally. That's very sobering. That means that we have to think about the issue of, say, the control problem with AI safety, which you see talked about in, say, Nick Bostrom's book. Think about it in terms of the evolution of intelligence more generally. It also means that we have to think about the kind of issues I raised today as being part of a larger issue about the nature of intelligent systems. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.